morning, fellow YouTubers. It's Frank Bush here again, just doing another urban survival video. And I just caught this deer roaming across the street. That's kind of my opening shot for the video. They're pretty lax about the deer population in the city I'm in, so you'll see them just kind of roaming freely. But there you have it. Always a good way to start the day. I wouldn't be surprised if I see another couple of them in the area I'm in. But yeah, lots of deer in my neighborhood. I get them in my backyard all the time. But either way, like I say, pushing onward. So in this video today, I'll be doing an urban survival video. I've had a few people request that I do more of them. And I finally managed to get a window of time to do it. So here I am. Hopefully this video is not quite as long as the last one. It was about an hour and 45 minutes, I think, the last one. So I'll try to make this one a little bit more cut, if you will, because I know people have issues with when they get to be longer than feature films. But so I'll cut scenes here and I'll kick back in a minute to a different location and kind of walk through the agenda for today soon. So one of the first things I'll point out is that with the season we're in, we're starting to see berries coming through. This is a small little pathway slash park area. These are good little areas to bed down in the evenings, where there normally isn't a lot of foot traffic through these zones. And like I say, there's neighborhoods right there, but as you can see, there's a fair bit of cover and stuff. So if you come in well after the sun goes down and you're out, you know, when the sun comes up kind of thing, you can find locations like this in urban areas where you can kind of crash out for the night, catch 40 winks, if you will, that kind of thing, and then move on. We'll step in here and show you kind of little concealed areas. These aren't ideal locations, don't get me wrong, but they're easily accessible. So I'll stop and kind of show this plant. I think I showed this in previous urban survival videos, but you can cut these at the base, strip them into strips, and turn them into cordage, and it makes an effective cordage. Not long lasting, but if you're desperate for cordage. When it comes to any type of urban survival video, I've got full gear in my bag, and I'll break that out in a bit and kind of walk through it. But there's a few kind of key components you want to gather if you don't have them as you move through your days. You're going to want a cutting tool, like a knife or something along that lines. You're going to want a steel container that you can cook and boil in. You're going to want some sort of cover if it just comes down and starts raining and that kind of thing, fairly heavy. You're going to want a combustion, a way to make a flame, you know, get your fires going. In urban survival situations, it's normally far more difficult to do, you know, wood burns and those types of things without getting noticed, but you know, it is doable. You just have to be really quick and covert about things. But yeah, you've got your cordage, your cutting tool, your combustion, way to make a flame, your cover, and your containers. You need those 5 things to kind of get through your days, whether it's urban or rural survival. You know, there's core key components you need to kind of do the things you need to do to get by in a day. So as we walk through the day, I'll kind of identify and point those types of things out. I'll just stop here at this point in time, but yeah, hopefully it'll be a good video. So I'm just walking through a field that's kind of very close to a residential area, you know, apartment complex over here. And I'll point out things like, you know, there's a drought going on in the area, but I'll point out things like clover. Sorry. You know, these are edible proteins, vegetable-based proteins. They're handy to have. But in fields like this, you can normally easily acquire small plants like clover to kind of gather up a bit of proteins that are easily available. You'll normally find dandelion and plantain and other plants like that in locations like this. One of the things you want to be kind of mindful of is when you look into the field, does it look like a really heavily maintained field? And what I mean by that, does it look like they're grooming it constantly and spraying it with pesticides and those types of things? If that's the case, you want to tend to stay away from eating foods from these areas, because they'll just make you ill. And there's another little patch of clover coming up here. Hopefully the camera's picking that up okay. You know, you could stop for 10-15 minutes and gather up the heads of those and have yourself a dose of protein as you move through the day. There's blackberries that are starting to come in this location. And one of the key things you'll find when you're moving through urban areas, you want to be really aware of where the water supplies are. So it's good to look on the map in the region that you're in and identify any creeks or any water supplies of any kind, whether it be ponds or creeks or lakes or down there. I don't know if the camera's picking it up that well. There's a creek down here, which is one of the few water supplies that's in this area. It's a bit awkward to get into, but you always want to be within reason relatively close to, we're just coming into a school now, want to be relatively close to water supplies, you know, and know where they are and have it that you're easily within walking distance of getting access to them. In this video, I'll show some other ways to access water when we're more into the urban environment, but I just thought I'd kind of stop and show this part where you could see there was, you know, 100 feet, 200 feet back that way, there was some clover, there was some water supply. You've got basic food and water stuff. It's not ideal, don't get me wrong, but if you're desperate for resources, it's easily achievable. Even through this field, lots of edible weeds and stuff that exist. I think there's some basic plantain here. It's in rough shape, mind you, but I'm seeing some basic plantain plants and that. Like I say, the die-off because of the lack of water, it's been fairly significant in the region I'm in, but I'll cut it here. I just wanted to quickly show you that, you know, some basic food and water is easily available in that regard. So I'll cut it here and kick back when I find the next interesting thing, yeah? So, a couple 100 feet away, see somebody's left some cans out. Just other people's garbage left lying around. But if you were desperate for metal containers, you know, you'd want to bring those up to a really high temperature. Normally there's plastic liners inside cans that are there to stop the can from rusting out. So you'd really want to kind of open flame burn that can and scorch the hell out of it and burn those plastics out. But you could easily have yourself a metal container in that regard. So here's a good example of fields where they don't mow it as often and that kind of thing, right? You can tell it doesn't look like there's a lot of pesticides being used here, if you will, if you see the volume of weeds. These can become good locations. And like I say, we're right across the street from a complex. You know, there's lots of buildings and people and that kind of stuff around. But, you know, there is edible plants all through these regions that are easily available. I think I mentioned this in the last video. People quite often end up throwing out furniture and just ditching it onto the curb and that kind of stuff. You know, the couch itself might not be something you'd want to keep, but in an urban survival situation, you know, these pads easily make good bedding, get you up off the ground and that kind of thing. So if you had a central location that you were using to kind of pool your resources and build up your inventory of supplies, you know, things like finding old couches like this are good bets. You know, if you took a knife and kind of even cut along the edging here and stripped out that piece of fabric, you know, you've got yourself some way to at least start to build yourself bedding that'll help keep you warm. I mean, obviously you'd have to have a location to stash that in, And we'll probably talk further on that as we go through time. But I'm just going to keep pushing through the neighborhoods. But normally you'll find these green spaces that are, you know, like I say, right across from, you know, residential areas and that kind of thing. It's not difficult to find little green areas that plant life is growing. There's blackberries all along here. And I'll even make mention, looks like some more plantain and stuff in through that area. So I'll even make mention with these blackberries. I don't know if I mentioned it in the last video, but you can see that, yeah, the berries are still green and that kind of thing. So at this point in time, it's not really fit to eat the berries. They're just not ready yet. But blackberry leaves themselves are edible. I'll just flip it over here and show you. So down that central spine of the leaf, you'll see spikes. Hopefully the camera's picking that up. You'll see spikes. This entire leaf, though, if you kind of strip it away from that spine, this part of the leaf that has no spikes or spines on it is fully edible. You know, if you're in need of calories, blackberry leaves can help build up, you know, a volume of food, even if the berries aren't available. And the good part about blackberries is they're evergreens, if you will. They stay alive and green all year long. So they're a handy resource, no matter what season of the year it is, to really have a quick trail nibble, if you will, as you're going. But like I say, I'm just kind of cruising through neighborhoods, so I'll cut it when I come, you know, cut it here and come back when something more interesting is. There's some dandelion there. You know, you could dig out the roots and everything to make a more substantial meal, but basic foraging stuff that you can do in urban situations is fairly elementary. So there's a little spot where this creek is kind of fenced off along, so to keep people out of it, but a little low-lying spot here. I'm not going to bother hopping in there, but just kind of, you know, these types of things are fairly standard. You're going to see them in a lot of urban areas where small creeks that are, you know, rain runoffs and those types of things going through the region. You know, if you don't have a silcock key and that kind of thing, you're going to be stuck to pulling water supplies from these locations. And generally speaking, as you're moving through environments, you're going to want to stay relatively close to these areas so that the water is accessible. You know, this water here, I would still boil. Any type of water coming out of a natural location, you have to go through the extra steps of kind of, you know, pulling it out, filtering the water to make sure there's no particulate in it and that kind of thing, and then boiling it off. So it does become a key part of your day. If you're being forced to pull water from natural sources like this, they can slow your roll, if you will, as you're wanting to move through urban environments. Now, in grid down situations where societal collapses happen and those types of things, a lot of the water being accessed through commercial buildings and that kind of stuff may be limited or non-existent altogether, and you might have to fall back to locations like this as a key way to grab, you know, water to kind of carry through your days. So like I said earlier, of becoming really aware of where your water supplies are throughout the regions that you plan on moving through, you know, before you even really start wandering through them, is key. It makes you know, and you not dying of thirst later in time a lot easier, if you will. But I'll cut it here and we'll carry on. Yeah, so I'm just moving into a more commercial section of the city because I want to make this, you know, significantly more urban than suburban if I can get away with it. But the town I'm in isn't really a large city, so but I just thought I'd stop and kind of show. I don't want to step on people's private property in that, but you can see a garden hose sticking out of the back of the building there. If you didn't have something like a silcock key, water supplies like that from a lot of the, you know, residential areas, you know, a lot of people have, there's another garden hose over there. If I was desperate for water, I'd be hopping the fence and filling up my container, if you will. One of the things you'll find in residential areas as opposed to commercial is there's, generally speaking, a lot more waste, a lot more debris. People leave a lot of garbage like lying in their yards and stuff. Unfortunately, you can see over on that property, hopefully the camera's picking it up, in the 5-gallon containers. You know, if I was desperate for containers to store things, I would want to look at harvesting one of those, if you will, you know, milk crate and that kind of thing. Any of those types of containers that help you gather resources as you move through time. You know, right now we're not in a grid down situation or anything, but if you were, the rule of law, you know, those types of things start to become washy at best. So you have to really start to analyze your situation and evaluate, you know, what resources you need, and is it safe to acquire those resources potentially in questionable ways. So like I say, stepping out into a more commercial environment now, and you can see almost immediately the resources really start to become a fair bit thinner. There's not a lot of stuff lying around. It's just empty parking lots, you know, that type of thing. But I'll cut over and swing by the mall here and point out a couple things as we go. So, you know, one of the things you will find is cardboard and paper only recycling, blah blah blah. So if you're looking for, you know, paper resources to start fires with, I mean, look, the stuff's already pre-shredded for me. They've done the work, if you will. You know, the shredders, to keep things confidential, have conveniently enough created readily available tinder sources. So if I didn't have a fuel supply, like I said, I've got full gear with me. If I didn't have a fuel supply, I would look at harvesting those resources and putting them into a bag and keeping them dry to making a fire easier in life. You know, there's cardboard and other things. This can be used to burn, but it can also be used as simple bedding if you wanted to get up off the ground. I think I mentioned that in previous posts. You know, you find things like pallets and those types of stuff. You know, as long as you've got, sorry, I'll adjust the camera. As long as you've got a good location to kind of store resources and that kind of stuff, things like these pallets and that are great resources to acquire. You know, they get you up off the cold of the earth when you're sleeping. Yeah, porta potty, and it's not even locked. So potentially there's toilet paper resources and that kind of thing in there. No, plywood. It's good for bedding, you know, or cover to keep you out of the conditions. So really one of the key things is you have to have a location that you know, or base camp, if you will, that you've hidden out somewhere in the city, that you would start to gather those resources and, you know, bring them to your gain, if you will. But like I say, I'll cut back out, come back when I'm over at the mall. So given the time of year I'm in, I've got a garden center where they've kind of set up all the potted plants and stuff for people to do their gardening. You know, if it's this time of year and you were in a grid down situation, there's top tier garden soil here. So if you were looking at growing a garden to produce edible plants and stuff in a grid down, I would be coming here to gather some of this soil, if you will. It's really high quality and it'll help your plants grow well. And potentially in the garden center, there's going to be other edible plants and stuff that you can grab and start to kind of get a crop up and running. You know, this stuff normally sits out 24/7. They're not going to pull it in a grid down situation. It'll just be left here. So if you acquire those resources, they could be good for you for long term for gardening and, you know, food self-reliance, if you will. And this stuff just sitting out, readily available. So I won't bother going in there because there's lots of people, but diverse range of different plants and stuff, easily accessible. You know, soils, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'll cut it here. So I just found another kind of garden sales coming off the store. You can see tomatoes half ready to go. Got lettuce here, and lettuce and veggies. A fairly diverse range. You know, depending on the timing and the situation in a grid down scenario, this could be basic stocks, and you can see piles of topsoil, other plants. They're just sitting out in the parking lot. Don't get me wrong, I don't condone theft of any kind. That's definitely not the agenda of this video, but I just wanted to show that you know, in locations like this where they're selling off vegetables and stuff, if there was a grid down scenario and these resources were sitting out and available, potentially you've got the basis for starting a garden to kind of get your food supply up and running. And you'll see over in kind of the back, I'm just moving around the back side of the mall just so you guys are aware of, generally speaking, when I'm doing any type of urban survival stuff, you want to be the gray man. I mean, I'm walking around with a GoPro right now, so it's kind of questionable to how, you know, unnoticed I am, but generally speaking, I wouldn't want to be staying out in the main areas that were easily visible. I'd always want to kind of be in the backs of areas, in the kind of shadows, if you will, just being as low-key as possible. You know, you don't want to draw any attention to yourself when it comes to these types of situations at all. You know, it's more simply moving through an environment as unnoticed as possible and identifying all the potential resources that are available to you. So, like I say, I'll kind of cut around. There's a little bit of a detour here, but I'll cut around and swing back over. Here's another example. I'm just on the back side of the mall now, and this is kind of the mall's backside, and you know, residential neighborhoods all around, and you can see that these areas aren't quite as, you know, kept on because they're not as visible to the public, but there's broadleaf plantain in there, clover, there's dandelion and more broadleaf plantain and that kind of stuff. Easily available resources for food. You know, when it comes to bedding down and that kind of thing, you've got concealed environments like the backside of that electrical unit there. You can see someone's already here, where good places to kind of bed down for an overnighter, if you will, without drawing much attention to yourself. So I'll cut it here. So, and you can see, like I say, kind of the very back side of the mall now. Of, you know, if you're looking for wood, because wood's normally a difficult thing to acquire when you're in urban environments, pallets will tend to be one of your key resources. And generally speaking, you'll find these things lying around all over the place, you know. But there's multiple resources here of metals, and you know, this cart potentially you could take to modify and turn it into a full cart, and it'll help you move resources across an environment. But you know, plastic piping. Sorry, that's metal. But yeah, metal resources and wood and those types of things. Quite often you'll find those in the backs of these types of environments. You know, there's more garbage where someone just tossed garbage, but the plastic bag itself might be a form of cover if you're in need of cover and you're finding it difficult to acquire. You know, you don't normally find huge piles of resources back in these areas though. You know, like I say, you might find a bit of metal, a bit of wood, which can be key. You can see there another further stack of wood resources, which normally when you're out in the residential areas you won't find as much of. Rebar, that can become invaluable if you know how to do, you know, blacksmithing and that kind of thing. There's the raw resources to make yourself tools with. You know, get your fire up and going, melt down the iron and form yourself a blade. There's lots of YouTube video tutorials on those types of things. But you know, it seems sparse when it comes to the stuff you see back here, but a lot of it are components that you're going to find difficult to just acquire roaming around in other parts of the city. You know, it's things like metal and wood, strangely enough, can become difficult to find when you're out in the residential areas. Tons of brick, and there's further brick over there. In an extended grid down scenario, you could potentially use that as building materials. There's more pallets of wood sitting over there. Well, like I say, fairly extensive resources when it comes to building and that type of stuff. There's plastic tubes over there. You know, all those things could serve purpose for more longer term. And once again, I'll point out, you know, ample supply of clover through this region. There's a large dandelion. And the ground here is relatively soft. You could literally pull them out. There's a root on them that's about the size of a small carrot. And definitely add to the caloric intake. Some mushrooms here. Looks like a puffball. I'm not going to bother harvesting any of those because, for one, I don't like how close I am to an urban, so, you know, to the buildings and that kind of stuff. But you can see there is easily available foods. When it comes to, sorry, there's just a bus right here. When it comes to, you know, urban survival situations, unless you're moving into an extended grid down scenario, you're not normally going to be harvesting too many animals in the short term. Your hunger won't drive you to that point. And I'll just keep kind of cruising along here to show you Lots of edible plants all through here. There's easily multiple days worth of meals. And look at the size of these dandelion, massive. But these are the types of resources you would want to harvest because they're readily available and easy to acquire, you know. If it was more extended grid down, you'd have to move into trapping and gathering up small game resources to kind of sustain your protein levels. But for the short term, things like this clover have really high percentages, you know, in dry weight, if you will, in comparison to things like chicken. There's a higher level of protein in this clover than there is in chicken. So, you know, if you're looking to just kind of keep your carbs and your protein levels up higher, you know, these types of resources are absolutely elementary to acquire. Oh, look at the size of these dandelion, just massive. And there's multiples. I can spend 20 minutes here and gather up enough food to feed myself for the next 2 or 3 days. I won't bother doing that because I've got resources in my bag. And like I say, I'll find a place to stop where I've got a bench and that kind of thing, and pull out all the items in my bag and kind of show you what I'm working with. But either way, you can see this is like a small scale farm equivalent, really. That's all dandelion and clover, all mixed all throughout there, you know. Some plantain, some dock is mixed in there as well. There's multiple edible plants all through that area. But yeah, I'll find a place where I can kind of stop and pull all the gear out of my bag and show you what I'm working with this time. So as I'm walking into a quieter area, stumbled upon this broken lampshade. You know, there's things, you know, you'd walk by this and wouldn't even think, but there's things like metal cordage right there that would be invaluable if you didn't have any cordage at all. Small lengths of chain. Now I would want to harvest those resources to build up my supplies. Like I say, cordage is one of the critical assets to have when you're out roaming through, you know, an environment. So I'll just keep pushing onward, but I just noticed that and thought I'd stop and add it into the video, yeah? So I'm just coming up to another little footbridge here. And I'll stop and mention, there's some horsetail plants. It's normally a sure sign that you're in a moist environment. So, like I say, I'll try to peek over the edge here. Got a water supply down below. So, you know, it's good to be mindful of, like I say, where all your water supplies are. Lots of blackberry bushes and other things growing. So, typically speaking, a lot of edible plants can be found, you know, and you get down to the water down through here. But a lot of the edible plants and that kind of stuff will be close to water supplies. So, you know, your food and water tend to have a fairly close relationship to each other, you know, when it comes to gathering your resources. As you can see, the blackberries are only just starting to, hopefully the camera's getting that, they're only just starting to show the first signs of any type of edibleness for the berries. But either way, I'll cut here, yep. So as I'm walking along, I noticed somebody had thrown some bright yellow, feels like some sort of fleece or something, but just scraps of fabric. Now if you had some fishing hooks and that kind of thing, you could easily make flies out of that kind of material. So, you know, those resources, even though it seems like total garbage, could potentially serve purpose for acquiring things like fish and that kind of stuff as you move through time. Like I say, the mole's straight back up that way, and I'm just pushing into a quiet area where I can find a bench at the park where I can kind of pull out my gear and go through things. That's not something you normally see very often, but a small pile of wood resources, you know, in a emergency situation, you normally would have fuel resources that you just kind of carry with you, but in extended grid down scenarios, any type of wood resources in urban environments is always a good asset to gather. And typically speaking, if I was out for a more extended time, if you will, like I say, the creek just kind of runs through here, so I'm just following along the creek. But if you were out during a more extended grid down scenario, you would want to have a base camp that you knew people weren't going to get into or find easily enough, you know, potentially right in the middle of a bush like this, you know, where it's thick and nobody would think to get in, but when you actually push to the inside of it, you'll see that there's hollows within it that you can kind of do things and set up camp. You know, those types of situations are really ideal, where the foot traffic through the zone is minimal at best, and potentially you've got a concealed area to kind of hide your resources, if you will. But you would really gather all your resources to a central location and start to acquire wood, food, water, you know, your basic equipment. So here's that creek now. Got, oh, there's a raccoon. If I had some conibear 110s, I would want to look at harvesting resources like that. You know, the fat on raccoons is really undesirable. Hopefully the camera's picking him up okay, but the fat on them is really undesirable, and you got to make sure you clear the glands off and that kind of thing, but so that they're not tainting the meat at all. He must be 5-10 pounds, so, you know, easily a meal. But like I say, there's a water supply. I would want to get like a bandana and filter that water and then boil it before I drank it, but you know, if it becomes extended grid down scenarios, these are the types of things that you're going to be looking for. Now this is a quiet area, there's not a lot of traffic, you know, backside of a couple houses and that kind of thing. So like I say, clover and dandelion and plantain and stuff, those are a lot of the kind of key core things you'll find. So I'm just at a, you know, park that's, this is one of the main roads, so we might hear some traffic as I'm going, but I'll set up on this bench and kind of pull out my gear and walk through what I've got in my backpack. Yeah, okay, so with this backpack, this is the waterfly. I did a video on this backpack a little while ago. It's probably been 6 months, 8 months by now, if not longer. I haven't really done a lot of videos given the sanitary crisis happening in the world, but such is life. So what I'll do is I'll walk through the main compartment that I have the majority of my gear in first. And so I've got this item. This is a silcock key, so I'll show this later on in the video. This is really used for accessing water in commercial environments. So if you're not familiar with a silcock key, this is a 4-way, but I'll show it in full detail of exactly what this is and how it works as we move on. I've got 10 ampere hour or 10,000 milliampere hour, I think it is, battery bank with a solar panel built right into it. I've got my water supply, which in fact I'll even stop and have some now. It's already been a couple hours, so. I've got little pocket rocket stove and my cooking container, and I've done videos, I don't know if I've done a video on the little pocket rocket stove, but it's a little butane stove, really tiny, only weighs a couple ounces. I'll be using butane rather than alcohol stove today, and as you can see, I've got my butane in the container. So now for an urban survival situation, having a container this size potentially could last me, if I was very efficient with my fuel use, could last me, you know, close to a week, if you will, if I was very conservative and mindful of exactly what I was using my fuel for, and trying to use as little as possible. But I'll end up pulling all this stuff out later on in the video and going through it in detail. I've got a Sil Tarp by Rab. It's a Sil Tarp 2. It's an 8x10 tarp. It weighs about a pound and a half, so it's really, really lightweight. I've got just a bag where if I gather some edible resources in, I want to just have a way to carry those. I've got some cordage where I've got my main guy line that I would put, or my main ridge line that I would put up between two trees in a bushcraft sense, but I've also got two small guy lines and they have cross-sticks on them and that kind of thing. So if you've watched previous bushcraft videos, you'll see lots of details of how those things are used. And then I've got a fleece sleeping bag. So it's really lightweight and compact. You know, for urban survival, and if it was the winter time, I'd want to move up to heavier gear, but ideally speaking, I want to be able to fit everything inside of a small bag to be able to travel as unnoticed as possible. So in here I've got a Renogy 30-watt folding solar panel. I've shown most of this gear I've shown in previous videos, but I'll go through the kind of different aspects of those things as we move through time. I've got a bit of toilet paper because it's always good to have emergency toilet paper as you move through the field. And then I have my food supplies, if you will. Rather than harvest things like dandelion and plantain, I'll identify and point them out, and I'll kind of nibble on them as I go, but I always like to have a small amount of food supply in my bag that's kind of long-term shelf-stable foods. So I've got a spoon, just as a side note, and then here, I'll clear this a bit, hopefully. So in this container I've got freeze-dried coffee, sugar, chocolate powder, and coffee whitener, and this is enough to make about 4, maybe 5 cups of coffee. So I'll stop and actually brew one off while I'm here and just take a break and things. And now in this container I've got some barley soup that I've made. Now this is barleys and dehydrated vegetables and beef bouillon stock all mixed together. Now these are all dried items, so the shelf life on these can last for multiple years before anything's going to go bad or anything else. So I can literally toss these in my bag and kind of forget about them. I also have a small can. I don't really like pushing product names or anything, but I've got a small can of Vienna sausages. They're like a chicken sausage. And then I've got a couple soy packets for flavoring, you know. So it's very skinny on the food that I've brought. The vegetables mix in here is like carrots, celery, onion, potato, peppers. There's a pile of different vegetables mixed in with that barley just to give me a good vitamin intake as well. But this will be my main meal later on. Now if I was moving for multiple days through an environment, you know, I know this is only a small package. I would potentially use half this package one day and half the next kind of thing, and gather some of the plantain and dandelion and those types of things, clover and those types of things, and mix them into the stew pot, if you will, as I went, to kind of extend the life in which I had these resources. You know, when it comes to extended grid down scenarios, you definitely have to make harvesting off of the landscape your main priority. As I've mentioned in previous urban survival videos, getting that caloric intake that you need and the water intake you need on a daily is critical to sustain yourself as you move through time. You know, they say that 2,000 calories and 2 liters of water is enough, but from my own experiences, when you're out in the field and you're exerting yourself on a regular basis, you know, you're going to want to push up closer to 3,000 calories, potentially even up to a gallon, maybe a gallon and a half of water a day. You know, as you're exposed to the elements and the heat's beating down on you and everything else, you're going to sweat, especially if you're carrying weight. You know, this stuff all together is only about 10-12 pounds, so it's a light kit. But if you were packing additional gear, or you were taking everything you have and gathering resources as you went, you could easily get up to the point where you're carrying 25, 30, 40, 50 pounds of weight. You know, that extra weight load as you're traveling through distance will require you to have more food and more water and those types of things. So I'm going to stop and brew off a coffee here, just to kind of take a break at this point in the video, and make myself off a coffee and pack all this stuff back up. So I won't show sticking this all back in the bag, but what I will do is probably find a little spot that I can set out these solar panels. I'll pull the battery out of the GoPro and stick that on the charger for a bit, and then kind of walk through exactly that little micro solar setup I have while I have my coffee break. Yeah, so let me cut scenes here and pack this stuff all back up, and then I'll show a few more things before I leave the park. Yeah. Okay, so before I get my coffee going here, might as well utilize as much of the sunshine as I possibly can. So under that premise, like I said, I've got this Renogy 30-watt solar panel. It's probably the most compact solar panel versus the amount of power it produces that I've found. So it's really good in that regard. Just gonna pull out some of the spare bits and bobs I have in here. But the thinking really is it's truly an elementary unit. You simply open it up. There's legs on the back. I pop those legs, set it up, and try not to get too many plants in the way. And then I've got a cable coming off for the USB. In fact, I'm just gonna pop that one in my pocket. Now I've got my little GoPro battery charger unit, and it's a USB driven device. So I'm just gonna plug that directly into the solar panels and let it start to take a charge. And I'll bring the camera over here and show you that, just make sure there's no debris on there. Make sure the panel's nice and clear so the sun can get at them really well. Yeah, it should be good. We'll just grab the camera here. So, as you can see, the solar panel just sits on a nice angle facing the sun, and you can adjust the angle in which they sit on with some Velcro here. And then, hopefully the camera's picking that up. The yellow light lets me know that my GoPro battery is charging. So, there's also additional, see if I can get in there. There's also additional USB plugs up here where I could be charging a cell phone or, you know, other USB driven devices that I have, like tablets and stuff. So when I'm out in the field, using this to kind of keep my gear going, if you will, while I'm doing these videos is a good gain for me to have. And in an urban survival situation, if you're wanting kind of to extend your power on your cell phones and potentially run small scale lighting in the nighttime and that type of thing, you know, even though you want to stay concealed and hidden as much as possible, you know, having a little setup like this is really ideal. Like I say, it's really compact, lightweight, produces 30 watts of power, which isn't a massive amount of power, but when it comes to charging things like tablets, cell phones, for me, GoPros, and that kind of stuff, it really is a good situation. So I'll just let that sit out and, like I say, kind of gather some charge into the GoPro so I can extend the video footage I catch as I move through the day. And I'll switch back over to make myself a coffee here. So let me just switch angles with the camera, and we'll get that set up so I can kind of take my coffee break at this point. So in previous urban survival videos I've done, I've shown using alcohol stoves, which really are super compact, and they are a very, very efficient way to do things. But you know, for these videos I like to mix it up. I know some people might not have an alcohol stove, they might prefer butane and that kind of thing. So in order to keep the crowds happy, I'll kind of mix up the gear I use. But yeah, here's my little pocket rocket and my butane. So this is a really simple device. It opens up and becomes a little platform that I can set my pot on. As such, hopefully the camera is picking that up okay. And these things only weigh a couple ounces. They're really super lightweight and compact. For space efficiency, butane stoves really are quite good in that regard. So you literally just screw it right onto your butane cap on the top. You might have seen my pot in previous videos. Quite often I use a slightly smaller one with a bail handle on the top, and I prefer those pots over really any other pot. But titanium with a bail pot or a bail handle and handles on the side, to me, are ideal pots to go with. But you just turn this valve, turns the fuel on, use a lighter and get it going, right? Simple process, but it's very quick and discreet. Let's see if I can switch the camera angles here. Drop it down a bit. So the heat is really quite rapid with these little butane stoves. It'll only take 4 or 5 minutes maybe to get this up hot enough. It was already potable water to begin with, but to get this hot enough where I can have myself my morning coffee. So I'll just kind of cut it at this point in time, and you can see, fully adjustable. If I want to crank the heat, just get it going as fast as I can. But you will compromise your fuel supply more rapidly if you keep it cranked. So now, generally speaking, I don't. generally speaking, I'm willing to take the extra, 30 seconds a minute to know that I'm not burning through the fuel quite as fast. But like I say, I'll cut it here and just kind of do my morning coffee break, and it'll give me a few minutes to let the solar panels and charge up that GoPro battery. So I'll come back in a few minutes. So just as a side note as well, you can see it's not throwing off any smoke or anything. Very discreet setup. If someone's driving by, they're not going to see anything that's going to set off any huge red flags. And the good part about these types of setups is you can set them up and tear them down really quick. So if I wanted to be in a more concealed environment, right now I'm sitting out in the open in the park, but if it was extended grid down and you were worried about your safety and well-being far more than I am at this point in time, you could easily set this up anywhere under the sun you wanted to, as long as you knew you were concealed from the public and you had a bit of light access for the solar panels. So then, like I say, I've got that pre-mixed combination of the sugar, coffee whitener, and hot chocolate. In fact, I'll just add in a dose of it. And hopefully the camera's picking the steam up. That was after about 4 minutes maybe of using the butane. So like I said, it's faster than the alcohol stove. If you really want to get stuff done quick, to get your cooking done and then shut it down, butane is king that way. Yeah, don't mind having it a bit stronger. And the good part is, because I pre-mix this to the combo I like, it really just becomes a debate of how much do I want to make it more like the strength of a mocha, or do I want to have it more like the strength of a regular coffee. And it's really just add in a bit more of the dole, if you will. But you can see I ended up using probably a third of that container. I like my coffee strong. And when I'm doing things like this, where I know it's just a video for YouTube, I don't mind using the additional resources, if you will, of having a little extra stronger coffee just to kind of give me that pep. But if this was a real life urban survival situation, I would have probably used closer to half of this amount, just to extend out my resources as long as possible. And that's a lot of the name of the game when you're doing urban survival, is you're limited to the volume of resources that you can carry as you're moving. So you really want to extend anything, whether it be the fuel you're consuming or the food resources you're consuming. You really want to use as little of those as you possibly can as you move through time, just to ensure that you have those resources for as long as possible. As soon as you get to the point where you start running out of things like this, in order to kind of get a primitive level of this, you have to start harvesting things like chicory roots and those types of things, and go through the process of roasting them and all that kind of stuff, just to replace a good hot drink that is like a coffee substitute, if you will. But that's work, and it takes time, and it takes resources to do. So you want to be mindful of all that kind of stuff. Normally, if you're doing an urban survival, some sort of catastrophic event has occurred, either that or you've become homeless, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, some sort of emergency catastrophic events occurred. You're needing to move from the location you're in to a new location, where you, generally speaking, quite often are aware of what the resources are at that new location you plan on going to. So you kind of fit that into your agenda of how fast can I consume the resources that I have, and how fast can I replenish those as I move through time at the next location. And if you're moving through multiple days of survival through an urban environment where you're moving from place to place to place, you might not know what the resources are coming, so you might have to spend more time gathering your resources as you go, and that's going to slow down your roll. I see these guys talking about, oh, I can move 20 miles a day with a 50-pound bag and stuff. When you're doing real urban survival situations and emergencies, and you don't have any food stock resources like I have in this example, it's going to slow you down. You're not going to be doing 20 miles a day. You just simply aren't. You have to stop and gather the resources to sustain your calories and to gather water that's going to be safe for you to consume. All of those things take time out of your day, and hence it takes distance out of your travel as you move. You know, realistically, if you're doing 5 to 10 miles a day and you're gathering enough resources to sustain yourself, you know, for calories and water and that kind of stuff, to me, you're doing really well. You know, and that's like half the speed that most people would think. You know, you get fatigue and those types of things. A lot of people don't go off and do these types of things on a constant basis, you know, so they have it in their head yet, yeah, I can do this. But as soon as you start doing this 2, 3, 4 a week, you know, 2 weeks in a row, as you're moving, you're going to find that you start to drain down and you're not going to be able to travel to the same degree you would on the first day or two. But I'll stop my rant and, like I say, kind of have my coffee break and that kind of stuff. So, but at this time, you know, it's time for me to take a break and time for you guys to do some work. So if you enjoy this type of content, you know, like, share, and subscribe. There's still lots coming in the video, so you don't have to kind of tune out at this point in time. But yeah, like I say, I'm going to stop and take my break, have a coffee, let the solar panels charge up a bit, then I'll cut back when I've packed everything up and I'm ready to go. Yeah. So I'm finished with my coffee break and just leaving the park area. So, and you can see this kind of awning setup that people have for their vehicles. In a grid down situation, there's a large tarp resources to give you cover. You know, you might have to do shady things to acquire it, but such is life in a grid down environment. So this is one of the main roads in the city, and we're just in a gap here in between one commercial region and another, where they've got some residential, you know, environment. So I'm not going to bother recording all through this environment. I'll wait until I push more into the commercial up ahead. Okay, so I've managed to push into the more kind of commercial or urban environment. Now, because I've depleted my water resources significantly there, I drank my coffee and then I drank the better part of my water. And my water container is only 40 ounces. So it's not enough to really get me through an entire day. So my plan here is to utilize that silcock key that I have to acquire more of a water supply. I'm going to cut the video here because I'm still out kind of on the main drag, if you will, but I'm gonna start to walk around to some of the sides and the backs of these commercial buildings, and I'll see if I can identify where there's a place I can utilize that silcock key to acquire water, and I'll show that to you in the video. Yeah, so before I even found a silcock key location, as you can see, water resource there. I could easily top up my water there, but I really want to show you an example of this silcock key. But you'll see taps like that on the sides of commercial buildings. Not often, but on older buildings especially, you'll start to see those types of resources that are available to you. So I could easily top up there, and if I can't find a location where I'm wanting to achieve what I'm talking, I might have to come back to that and get some water supply, but that's not the prime objective at this point in time. Like I say, I'll just keep hunting for the silcock key use and show that on the video. So as another form of potential water supply, quite often you'll have fountains in cities. You know, in the wintertime they tend to shut them down, that kind of thing, but there's water available, and that normally comes off the city lines. So it tends to be drinkable water. But because it's in this kind of situation, I would normally boil that regardless. But like I say, I'll swing forward more and find the elusive silcock key. Alright, so here's an example of where a silcock key comes in handy. So there's some pillars right here and here. I'll set up on those pillars so that I can gain access, set the camera up on those pillars so I can gain access to this water supply using the silcock key. Yeah? So let me just strap this onto this bowl Bear with me. So now I'll simply take out my silcock key and my water. And I'll just stop and show you now. So with this silcock key, it's got 4 different heads on it. Hopefully the camera's picking that up, that are different sizes. Depending on which size the head is on the faucet will determine which one I use. Yeah, it's really simple. But these are like keys to the commercial water city, if you will. So I simply figure out which one's the appropriate one. That one seems to be the right one. And I've got water. It's really that simple. Now, even in a grid down scenario where these buildings might have their water supply shut down by the city because of a grid down scenario, there's normally going to be enough water pressure still in these lines where you'd be able to extract out a liter or 2, even if the lines were dead. The gravity and stuff will just, and the pressure in the line will just allow it that one way or the other you'll have a bit of water out of them. It might not be a long-term solution for you, but you know, you don't need that when it comes to urban survival. You just need to get access to the resources, even if it's only one time, and move on. So one way or the other, my water supply, and I know that's potable, my water supply is fully back up and running, and I'm off to the races again. Now, generally speaking, you'll find that in pretty well every commercial building, they're going to have this kind of setup. If I see a few different styles, I'll show them to you as I move through the video, but you can see that even in an area where it's bone dry and there's no water supply around, having a silcock key can be invaluable in an urban survival situation. So here's another example of where you'd use a silcock key. You say there's no handle on it. The silcock key becomes the handle. This is just the backside of a gas station. There's a restaurant here, and they had one with a full tap on it and everything else. A lot of commercial buildings will have that as a resource. Like here, you know, you don't even need a silcock key. There's water supply, right? So it's not always difficult to acquire water resources when you're in an urban environment. I'm still of the approach of it's good to be mindful of where the freshwater supplies are, like ponds and creeks and stuff, just in case an extended grid down does occur where the water supply in the buildings might be shut down indefinitely. But yeah, you can see if I find another couple more examples of the silcock, because they come in a lot of different flavors, I'll put those in the video as well. But at this point in time, I'll just kind of shut the camera down and keep cruising. Okay, so as I was walking down the path, these are canned pasta. You know, the cans look like they're in decent state even. 10 to 1 that the food in there is, yeah, is good without question. There doesn't seem to be any punctures or anything in the can, but, and the best buy date, or the best before date, is 2022 July 03. But generally speaking, with canned food, I find as long as it's not bloated or there's no dents or anything in it, it'll survive for years longer than what they state. But that would be a supreme bonus to find this. Like I say, I'm just walking down the street of somebody, I guess, just left them there. But right there would be, you know, 2 days worth of food, if you will, you know, or 2 meals in a day, or any of that kind of, however you want to look at it. I won't bother taking these because I have my own resources, but you know, if I was a homeless person or in an urban survival situation, something like this would be a fantastic score. Not only do you have the food that's sitting inside it, you also have the steel container where if you cook that off, you know, like I say, you got to get it into a good flame and get the plastic out of the inside of it, but potentially you've got a cooking vessel as well. So I'll cut it there, but that's definitely a good score to find. Okay, so I just stepped in off a path into a vacant lot here, and found somebody else had been here. But one of the things I did find, that's what the camera's getting at it, right, was a kettle with a reusable metal strainer, which is ideal for if you were doing off teas and that kind of stuff. You wanted to keep the bits out of the liquid, if you will. So if I was in a situation where I had no gear, I would definitely want to take this resource as my own. In fact, I like this metal thing. I might even just take that and keep it. And, I've got uses for that in future videos as well. But yeah, a small amount of debris here, a bit of clothes potentially if I was shy on clothing. There's a resource there that I could have, and it looks like some sort of binder. Don't know how much use I'd have for that, but here you can see blackberries are starting to become ready for harvest. So in fact, I'll even pop a couple myself. Yeah, they taste all right. So, you know, little sugar rushes like this definitely help give you energy as you move through the day. And I haven't been showing it too much in this video because I have in previous videos, I do believe, where as you go, as you see the edible foods that are in the area you're in, you kind of want to harvest as you go to help get the calories into you. In this video, I really wanted to show the water access in urban environments and that kind of thing, but it is a critical importance that you keep your calories and your water supply constantly going into your system as you're moving. And, you know, you want to do good time and you want to move light, so you don't want to take a lot of stuff. But if you don't have a cutting tool, a way of doing combustion, some cordage, some cover, and a steel container that you can cook in, you're going to want to gather those resources as quickly as possible as you move through time. So, like I say, I'm just kind of in an empty field lot here. There's houses on both sides of me, so I'm not going to stay here any length of time. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of stop and show you that. So just kind of stop and show these plants as well. It's another excellent form of cordage making material. A few trees here where snub off some of the greens. With these branches, you can peel them and they run. Let's see here. Hopefully the camera sees that. Or you can run them in long lengths. And if you know how to make cordage, there's lots of YouTube tutorials on how to make cordage from scratch with a shoe twine method and that kind of thing. But those plants are really excellent at making cordage as well. So in an extended grid down scenario, things like that motorcycle cover could make an excellent kind of waterproof sleeping bag, if you will. Acquiring resources like that, if you were desperate, could be good to help keep you dry while you were sleeping. All right, well, oh, like I say, I'm just right in a commercial area, but here's a plant you don't see very often in urban environments, but they are fully edible. This is fireweed. So the leaves, the stalk, everything is edible in these plants. The leaves have a bit of a bitter taste, but the flowers themselves are a bit on the sweeter side. And really, down below there's a fairly extensive taproot that exists on these plants that you can extract and eat as well. There's another one here. Like I say, this one's already gone to fluff, the seed. So normally with larger, healthier fireweeds, I've shown it in previous videos, where that fluff that comes off them is an excellent fire starter. It's almost like a cotton ball. It just goes. It's a flash, you know, flash tinder, if you will, so they don't last long. And with larger versions of these plants, the tastiest bit is really the inner pith of the plant. These ones are only tiny, so it's not worth it in these regard, but the inner pith of these plants tastes almost like a sweet cucumber. They're quite a tasty treat. But yeah, I'm just really surprised to see these plants in a urban setting. Normally I would see these out in the woods where fire has passed through an area and they rise up, if you will, hence fireweed or fire plant. But easy to harvest resources like this. Boil them off, throw them in the pot, fully edible, lots of calories, good for you. So forgive the traffic because it is super loud, but here's a narrow leaf plantain It's a good example of it. This time of year, you'll see these kind of stalk heads rise out of them, so fairly easy to identify. But these leaves, the plant's fully edible. The leaves, I wouldn't eat these bits because they're not that tasty at this point in time. They're kind of past that point, but the leaves are definitely an edible treat. I wouldn't eat them in the location I'm in. I just wanted to show this as a good kind of prime example of narrow leaf plantain and what it looks like. And I'm right on one of the busiest intersections in this region, so I'm not going to bother harvesting these resources, but just wanted to show you that even in densely populated urban environments, there is edible foods. So in here we have a yucca plant. It's in pretty poor state really, but this makes some of the best cordage, natural fibered cordage that's available. You know, exactly as I showed earlier, you kind of pull these and strip them into bits and then just twine them together. But one of the other interesting realities is the root ball that exists on this plant is actually fairly significant. It's got saporins in it, which are like naturally occurring soaps. So in a extended grid down environment, like I say, sorry about the noise, we are in a heavily populated zone, but in an extended grid down environment, the roots of these plants make an excellent soap. So I know I mentioned identifying other locations of where silcock keys could be used. So, you know, you gotta just kind of learn to keep a keen eye out for them. But here's another prime location where the silcock key goes in there and the water comes out there. So I'll identify a couple of them as I move around this building here. So, and here's another example of a silcock key usage. So, like I say, I just identify which one's the appropriate fit, and water supply it is. And these types of things are, I'll just make sure it's all shut down. These types of things tend to be commonplace on most commercial buildings, yeah? And yet here's another example. Like I say, almost every commercial building, if not all of them, have that level of access. You know, make sure you shut them down so they don't go. But having a silcock key like this really gives you access to water all over the city. Like I say, it really is an invaluable tool in an urban survival environment. So I'll make this one my kind of last example in the video, if you will. But just because, you know, I just wanted to show the variance of the different looks of these things. They don't always look identical, but oh, that one's stripped a bit. Oh, it's on there pretty tight. And they keep that one cranked. And there you have it. So like I say, you may be far away from access to a creek or a pond or a lake or, you know, any of that kind of stuff, but at least in an urban environment, if you have one of these keys, you will have access to water, and that's a critical. So I've just pushed back into neighborhoods a bit, and I've make a side comment about, you know, recycling days and those types of things when it comes to suburban environments. Quite often you'll find things like 2-liter pop bottles and those kinds of things where they make great water containers, you know, clean them out and use them. And people tend to have small edible gardens and those types of things. You know, obviously that's protected by the, you know, from the animals and stuff, but more edible foods here. You know, and you'll see that all along. Looks like some natural raspberries here. Yeah, natural raspberry. Harvest a couple of those. Oh, they're tasty too. Man, are they ever good. You know, a little sugar intake. And just on this little patch here, half decent amount of raspberries grown. And they are yummy. But I kind of like moving more through suburban areas rather than full out urban, because you look for different resources when you're in urban environments. I'll just keep cruising. You know, when you're in urban environments, you're looking for things like steel and glass and those types of stuff. They tend to be more commonplace. Here's a scrap of metal, potentially could be modified to turn into some sort of cutting implement. But generally speaking, when you're in suburban areas, you're going to find things like small gardens that people are growing edible foods. Then you're going to find things like a lot of people throwing stuff out or leaving stuff out in their front yards of cordage and containers and cutting tools and those types of things, where you don't find that as much in heavily populated urban environments. You really have to kind of leave those zones to find different resources. Now, like I say, I'll push back into the urban area later on in the video, but just wanted to kind of do this little jaunt through one of the neighborhoods to show the volume of assets that people leave out can create environments where your survivability in an extended grid down scenario can easily be advanced far better in an urban environment or a suburban environment than in a full-out urban commercial environment. I just wanted to show this plant over here. This is a fennel plant. They grow extensively through this region, and these are edible plants. It's kind of got a wispy look to it, but hopefully the camera's giving that justice. But it's got a taste like black licorice. It's actually quite tasty. Another small garden someone's made out in front of their property. I don't know how many edible things are in here, but there's more fennel. Looks like it's been cut back, but fennel is a hardy plant, and it produces a lot of edible food, and it actually has a nice taste to it. Like I say, if you're okay with black licorice, it tastes a lot better than some of the bitter plants that you can get when you're out in the wild. So I'll start to push back out towards more commercial areas again. I just wanted to show you the ease of food resources when it comes to the suburban, if you will, in comparison to the urban. The urban can be readily available for water and that kind of stuff, but food can be readily available in suburban environments, so depending on where you are, it's good to get an idea of what resources are going to be available to you in the different regions, and then depending on what you need to focus on those directions of travel, if you will. All right, guys, so I stopped, and I'm in the backside of a hardware store at this point in time. But I stopped and needed to charge up my GoPro batteries, so I stopped and had a coffee. I didn't bother recording that because it was already earlier in the video of how I do that, but I've had the battery on the go now for a while. I'm hoping that it gets to the point of full charge. So if you want to know further details about these solar panels, I did a full video on kind of portable solar that's up on my channel, so you guys can check that out. But needless to say, I've actually been recording a fair bit. I know in the beginning of this video I said I wanted to make it a short one, but with the urban survival ones, they always tend to be longer videos. So needless to say, I had to stop and have a coffee, and I've literally been camped out for a couple of hours now, just letting the batteries charge up so that I can do further filming. And then the next part of my video, I plan on stopping and finding a quiet area where I can kind of cook off that soup that I showed earlier in the video and kind of get some food in me. I'm getting really hungry at this point in time. It's been a long day. The nibbles that I've had of the edible plants and stuff on the way have helped offset that a bit, but I'm getting to the point where I need a full meal into me. So I'm going to wait for a few more minutes until this battery, hopefully that light turns green instead of yellow. I can't speak to how YouTube will color change on things, but needless to say, when that hits green, it'll be full. But either way, the battery that I've got in the camera right now filled up, so I was able to pop that back in. And this one looks like it's just taking a few more minutes, but it should be close, I would think, at this point. So as soon as this gets fully charged, I'm going to move on to a quieter location. And like I say, it's not that busy where I'm at, but one way or the other, discretion is king when it comes to these types of things. I just wanted a spot where I get good sun, and as you can see, the sun at this location is pretty prime, and the foot traffic and stuff is pretty quiet, so it just gave me a spot where I could quickly do off boil up the coffee and that kind of stuff. But I won't keep rambling. I'll charge this up, and then I'll cut to the next scenes of me having dinner. Okay, so I've wandered a bit into more of the suburban environment where I'm on the backside of a church, and this is the parking lot that they use, that kind of thing. I've stocked up my water supply. There seems to be an electrical power outlet here, so if I needed wall power, at least there's some accessibility. But I'm just looking for an area to quietly stop and cook up dinner. I can hear that there's people in the church and that kind of thing, so I'm not going to draw too much attention to myself, but this is kind of a prime location now. As you can see, I'm in a blind backside area where there is no real foot traffic. So to me, this is a good location. I'm going to probably move into this corner right here and just here's some cordage. Looks like a good quality cordage as well. So, you know, if I didn't have any cordage and I was desperate for it, this would be an invaluable resource, and there seems to be a significant amount of feet for it, that kind of thing. So, you know, grid down scenario, that type of resource is something that would be, in my mind, grade A. There's a jug over there, milk jug. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but that would be a good water container if I was desperate for a water container. Like I say, I've got the gear in my backpack, so it's not a problem, but here's a shining example of, I would use that as long as it doesn't look broken. I would definitely flush that out, but I would want to use that as a water container if I was desperate, just so that I had mobility with water supply. But like I say, I'll stop here and kind of cook off dinner, yeah? Okay, so I've just kind of pulled my stuff out of my bag here, just to make it as expedient as possible. But the thinking really is, let's get the gear up and running as quickly as possible. And time is always of the essence when it comes to these types of things, given the fact that you're in an urban survival situation. You know, you're deemed as being a homeless person by default, and frowned upon and demonized and all sorts of stuff, which to me is a tragic reality of the fact that we treat other human beings in that regard. But that's a whole other video within itself. But let's just get this going as quickly as possible, yeah? So, and I didn't mention earlier in the video, but I normally have a couple lighters on me. So, and then I do have on my hip, I wear a multi-tool, and I've got a ferro rod, which I tend to have just as EDC or an everyday carry, that kind of thing. So let's get some water in the pot. Yeah, half decent amount. I'll make it about half full or so. I want a half decent sized meal, right? Like I say, it's been a long day and I'm hungry, so. I'll get that water going as quickly as possible. And it's really simple. I'm going to take my barley soup mix that I made there, and well, I'm going to put a good dole of that into there. Realistically, I see it as about half a container is going to make a half decent sized meal, and everything's in there that needs to be to make this soup. I don't have to do anything beyond that other than just kind of let the barley cook and let the rest of the vegetables that are in there rehydrate. And then typically speaking, when it comes to the Vienna sausages, I'll keep all the juice because there's a lot of fat and salts and other good things in there, and I'm just gonna carve those off with my spoon to add them to the meal. And nothing fancy here for sure. Treating this pretty well as slim as they come, if you will. But if you're in an urban survival situation, even though the stuff came out of a can, I still like the idea of heavily boiling everything you have. Don't take any chance on sickness. You know, I mean, I'm safe in this situation given the nature of what I'm doing, but if I was in an extended grid down situation, my primary concern, more than anything else, is not becoming ill. You know, becoming ill, even if it's a minor sickness that'll only last you a week or two, that can become deadly quickly if you're having to live this way day after day after day. So you're better off to make sure all your water is boiled if it's not potable, and make sure your food is thoroughly cooked, you know, more than you would normally at home, if you will, just to make sure there's no bad bits in there that are going to make you sick, you know, in any kind of way whatsoever. The last thing you want is to be compromised by illness. So I'm going to bring this up to a boil, and then it's going to cook for about 20 minutes. I'll probably show you a step or two along the way, but really that's all there is to it. This thing just has to sit and cook now. Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes now. I'm just going to kill the heat on this, and you say makes a fairly substantial, let me just grab the camera here, makes a fairly substantial pot of soup. The barley's kind of come to life, if you will, and I've already taken a few sips of this just because I wanted to see myself. I mean, it's damn hot, but delicious. So this is really just, like I say, and there's lots of barley in there. Hopefully the camera's catching that. Lots of barley in there to give me carbohydrates, and then with the sausage, give me fats and proteins, and the vegetables in there. You got all sorts of different vegetables. I do a lot of dehydrating and stuff. I haven't put many of those in videos and stuff, but I put up some canning videos and that kind of thing. But I've done a significant amount of prep for the sanitary crisis that's gone on, and these are just some of the dry stocks I have, if you will. This is my pantry stocks, some of them, and so I'm going to stop and eat this though. And like I say, there's got to be, I would imagine, probably about 600-800 calories worth of food, if not more, in there. So, you know, it's a substantial sized meal. It's not enough to equal the 2,000 that you need in a day, but potentially I would have, you know, a larger amount of the barley soup mix that I had stored, and a couple more of those cans of the Vienna sausages in my bag. I only brought along this as an example, but to show you of, you know, you can have fairly significant sized meals and very light pack weight and very small amount of space that it takes up. So, and one of the things I do like about this type of food as well is, other than the extremely long shelf life it has just sitting in a bag, it goes really well with adding in edible plants from the area. You know, I could easily put in some dandelion and plantain and those types of things into this pot, and have it just add to the meal without it really affecting the flavor as much. You know, this tastes like a beautiful beef and barley soup, if you will. That's the best way to describe the flavor of it. Even though it's Vienna sausage, I used a beef stock as the flavoring, so it does have a kind of a very beef and barley flavor. But like I say, I'm famished, so I'm going to stop and get this into me, and then we'll start to kind of look at moving forward of picking out a location to bed down. And because of the camera and the lighting and stuff, when the sun goes down, I'll probably pre-set up something just to show you guys. I've done that in previous videos, because I know the GoPro and poor lighting just is crap. You can't really see anything with this GoPro when the sun goes down. So I'll probably go find a location, set it up before the sun goes down so you guys can see exactly what I've done there, and then wrap this video up, really. So as I was eating my dinner, that's my gear down there. Like I say, I'm still at the back of this church here, but as I was eating my dinner, I kind of did a little cruise around here just to see, and I'll show you kind of an ideal spot to do an overnighter. So this little area here is a path that just leads into a dead end with some fences and that, so that the neighbors don't see you. So this to me looks like an absolutely prime location. You've got kind of cover on the front, so you're a little bit hidden from the traffic that might possibly come into this parking lot, but even the parking lot itself is pretty dead. But as you can see, the likelihood of the neighbor coming out that gate after the sun goes down is pretty minimal. And it looks like a nice flat area where you could kind of bed down in. So this would probably be the overnight location. I'm suspect. So I won't stay here, because I've already been here for, what, half an hour or so, cooking my food and eating it and that kind of thing. So I'll tip out of this location. I've still got a bit of my soup left, but I'm starting to get full, actually. So But I'll finish that off because I want the warmth into me and I want the calories into me. I'll raise my body temperature and stuff for, it will only be another, it's warm right now, but it'll only be another hour or two and the sun will start to tip down. And so what I'll do though is I'll go to a different location somewhere close by here that looks like it's really secluded, that I can kind of show you the setup of the sleeping system that I would do. And then I would end up doing the exact same system in that location, but I'm not going to do it here because I don't want to draw any attention to me. I don't know if there's anybody staring out, windows of people's homes or anything, and the sun's still out and it's still, not too late in the day. So either way, I'll just leave here and then come back after the sun's gone down to do what I need to do to kind of do an overnighter, if you will. But as you can see, this is really a prime location to kind of stop in. There's no one here. I've been here for half an hour. I haven't seen one person come through this area. So, when it comes to urban survival, finding these kind of little back nook areas, in behind churches or in behind civic centers and those types of things, are ideal, really. The very little traffic, and it's, quiet and all that happiness of, if that location wasn't available there, which I kind of like, it's really concealed. Inside this here, I'll step around. Yeah, I can hear people over in the backyards over here. So, but even to tuck out inside this location, it's just big enough for a body, but it's still kind of exposed to the parking lot and stuff. I would want to be backing away, but if that was the only option I had, I would go for that. So like I say, you don't normally want to kind of bed down until well after the sun goes down, everything's calmed down and it's getting into the evening fairly well. And then you want to be up and out before the sun comes up so nobody ever knows you were even there. And then you're on to the next day. Since gathering the water, gathering the food and that kind of stuff. And then day after day. So all in all, I've traveled probably, I would say, maybe 15 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles. Probably 9-10 miles or so. So I've done a half decent amount of travel. Slowed up a bit by the fact that I've stopped and done recording and that kind of stuff. But if I was harvesting large amounts of food resources, I'd be slowed up fairly significantly and would have to take my time. So it gives you kind of an idea of the distance you would travel of, 10K a day, say. And that's, so if you're planning on going to a location that's 30-40 kilometers away, plan for 3 or 4 days to be able to escape the location you're in to get to the new safe zone you're heading to. I talk in kilometers because I'm just used to that now. It's been years since I was into miles, but one way or the other, I think, we'll say 8 or 9 miles a day. I'm ballparking at this point in time that you're going to travel. So if you're looking at going, 24 or 32, 36 miles or something, take into account that that's going to take you multiple days to traverse the terrain while you're sustaining yourself as you go. So generally speaking, I'm going to want to keep my shelters, like I say, really simple. You normally want it to be 2 minutes to set up, 2 minutes to tear down, that kind of thing. You're always the unwelcome guest, if you will, when it comes to urban survival. No matter what the scenario is, you generally are treated with a level of hostility that you just don't see when you're out in bushcraft adventures and those types of things. So you have to be far more cognizant of being low-key. Being the gray man is really key. You might notice even the clothes I'm wearing, there's not really too much noticeable, identifiable things. It's fairly bland, generic clothes. I did that intentionally because I wanted to draw as little attention to myself as possible. So in these scenarios, I'm going to take my tarp, fold it in half, and lay it down. And there's not going to be much more to it than that. It's really just to keep any rain that might come down in the middle of the night off you, and to help stop the winds from cutting through your sleep setup. And then I would simply turn around and take my fleece sleeping bag, open this up a bit, roll out my fleece sleeping bag. And there you have it, really. Like I say, I don't get much more complex than that when it comes to urban survival stuff. You crawl into your sleeping bag, you know, at the head here. Take the tarp, make sure that it's covering your entire sleep setup, and call it a day. That there's really nothing too glamorous to it. If the winds were fairly breezy, there's tie-outs that exist on these tarps where I've got tie-out points. I would peg those to the earth just to make sure that there was no movement. I've shown that in previous videos, but this is really a very simple, basic setup. There's nothing to it, you know, and I would use this simply just to, when the sun went down, I went into the location, set this up, went straight to bed, straight to sleep. Normally, I do have in my bag here, I do have the larger battery, which I really didn't show charging or using in this video because it was already fully charged. But on this, I do have a light, so it gives me some sort of, you know, candle option, if you will. And then if that light dies for any reason, inside my solar panel kit, I also carry an additional little mini waterproof USB light. So I'll just kill that light and switch it over where this is really my backup light, if you will, if this one dies for some strange reason. Normally these are really reliable, but in the event that it does die, I have an emergency backup light. And because it's flexible, I can bend that and keep it right inside my tarp to give me a bit of basic lighting if I wanted to just kind of see something, to do something for a few minutes, but really not enough light that it's gonna make anybody in the area aware. Being covert is the key when it comes to urban survival. You definitely don't want to draw any attention to yourself in any way, shape, or form. You want to be the gray man. You want to be unnoticed. You want to gather your resources. Now, even in this video, I was walking down a lot of main roads and that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, I wouldn't do that very often. If I was in a real urban survival situation, I would want to kind of stick to more secondary roads and gather my resources and then fill this bag with food as much as I could, even if it was beyond what I need for the day, just so I didn't have to take the time to stop and do that the next day. You know, to have some sort of kind of food stocks with you as you go. Just, you know, if you got food and you got water, it allows you to move faster. And that's really one of the keys to urban survival. Most people don't just do this and kind of lollygag around an area and want to hang out and stuff. They're doing this because some emergencies ended up occurring. They're wanting to get from one location to another safely and as efficiently as possible. But you must be mindful that if that's a reality you're facing, then you have to turn around and keep your water supply and calorie intake up as you go, because potentially you could be days of travel. You know, some cities are large centers. It might be 30-40 kilometers for you to get out of a city environment and into something that's more kind of bushcraft friendly, or, you know, where the resources tend to be a little bit more abundant and your survival skills can be used a little bit more, or, you know, those types of things. Generally speaking, urban survival isn't something people tend to do for the longer term. It's something that's a short span of 48 to 72 hours. They're really in just a crisis situation where they're trying to keep themselves sustained and safe as they move through the environment. So, and as you can see, there's nothing to kind of packing this all back up and getting it going. If you hear noise on the camera, there's a golf course that's right on the other side of these bushes, so there's people playing golf. They don't even know I'm here. But that's the thinking, really, of you want to be able to pack this stuff all up in a matter of a couple minutes, and you want to be low-key as you're doing it, and you want to keep it simple. You know, in some of my bushcraft videos I show where, you know, you build a shelter with doors and it's all enclosed and everything, and that's great if you plan on staying in the same location for 3 or 4 days. You know, quite often I'll put up what I call work tarps, you know, just to give me an area to work in, separate from my shelter and that. You don't tend to do that when you're in urban survival situations. You tend to be really low-key, in and out, and mobile, you know. So doing elaborate shelters is definitely not something that's gonna aid you in an urban survival situation. If anything, it'll be a detriment to you, because it'll take far longer to tear everything down and get back to the point where you're fully mobile again. You know, I'm talking as I'm doing this, so it's kind of slowing me a little bit, because I'm trying to focus on the things I'm mentioning to you guys. But you can see that, you know, within 5 minutes, I'm back to a situation where I'm ready to just toss these things into my bag and go. And that really is, like I say, it's critical. Quite often you'll be lucky if you have 5 minutes. You know, somebody comes out and it's an angry neighbor and they don't want to see you in their environment and blah blah blah. It's just a matter of minutes before they're going to end up phoning the police, and there's going to be hostilities aimed, you know, at you. You don't want to have any type of confrontation. That's not your objective in any way, really. Your objective is just to keep acquiring resources as you move. But there you have it. That's the exact same kind of shelter I'm going to set up over at the other location when the sun goes down. I wanted to show it to you here just because I know that these GoPro, I'm on an older version of a GoPro, and these GoPros are terrible at low lighting conditions. They just are. And even when I bring along lighting, I've tried it in the past to light up an area, and I need to bring along huge piles of lights just so the GoPro can handle it. So it's not ideal. It's best to just kind of show you guys, you know, as the example here, and then do the exact same thing when I go into the location. But I'm going to pretty well wrap it up at this point in time. If you enjoy this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching, yeah? Cheers. Alright guys, so I'm back at the location. I just wanted to show an example of how bad the lighting is with the GoPros. The reason why I kind of show it in the daytime. The bedding is in there, and let me just set my camera in, and I'll turn on the light to see if I can kind of make it a bit better. But yeah, so you can see I've got the bedding set out here, but I find it really doesn't give the GoPro doesn't really give low lighting any type of justice. And like I say, as soon as I kill that light, it just becomes pitch black and you can't see anything. With the naked eye, I can still make out where it is and that kind of stuff, but filming in the night like this just really isn't of any gain. But it's quiet where I'm at. Like I say, sun's gone down now, bedding set up and that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna wrap it up at this point, and like I say, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video though, yeah? Thanks for watching.